About gender and sexuality in Latin America, and I was asked by the organizers of this event to moderate this evening, and so I shall do so. And I'm first going to turn the mic over to Aida Manduley. I'm going to be really bad at all the names that I pronounced tonight, who is going to give us some opening remarks.
But you can. Yeah, I'm not wearing shoes. I'm cool like that. So everyone, thanks for being here. First of all, clearing the house, or clearing the air, I guess. Whatever, I'm Hispanic. There's a live stream going on, so if you don't want to be recorded in any way, don't step in front of it. If you don't want your voice to be recorded, let me know. Now or later. So if you want to ask questions at any point and you don't want your voice to be recorded, we have slips of paper over there and over there. So you can grab one. We'll be picking them up as the event happens. So if you have a question but you're too shy, you don't want to say it in the live stream, you just want to make a cute drawing to make me happy, you can do it on those papers. Also, so the hashtag for Twitter is #SexPanic. So if you're tweeting about the event, Sex Panic, tweet about the event because then people who aren't here, they can hear about it. What else? We're on Twitter also, Brown Chic. So if you're on Twitter, you can add us and then you'll be updated with our events and all the things that we're doing. Who's actually sponsoring this event? It's Chic, surprise, surprise, and the Queer Community Committee of the Queer Alliance. That's more or less it. If you have any questions at any point, again, just write them on a slip of paper or raise your hand. This is a very informal panel, so we'll be engaging with you. We won't just be talking at you. So now I'll turn it over to the moderator.
So I am now asked to introduce the topic. Tonight's event is called Sex Panic, When Educators Are Censors. And the first question I asked the organizers was, are Brown professors censoring conversations? And I was told, no, that's not the case, that this is a problem external to Brown in which alum and others in the area have raised the questions about the legitimacy of discussions, frank and open discussions, appropriate discussions about sex in the context of an educational institution. And as I understand it, when I was asked to moderate, I asked to talk to Ida. I didn't want to walk into a maelstrom of controversy and find myself in the midst of something I didn't understand. So we had a wonderful talk, and I looked at some material on the web from people who were complaining to Brown University. To Ruth Simmons' defense, it seems that outside pressure from alum has not, as far as I understand it, managed to silence the ability of students at Brown and faculty and staff to talk about these questions. And so we're doing that this evening. And so to a certain extent, this is a speak out or opposition to an external force which is trying to silence us, but I don't think that's going to happen here tonight. And so we're going to have an opportunity to have a really good discussion about how it is safe and possible to have these kinds of discussions within an intellectual and academic setting. So the way we're going to do things is the panelists themselves are going to just, in 1 minute each, introduce themselves as I did very briefly. We don't need to hear the long resume, but their short resume, their 1 minute elevator resume. And then we're going to go in the order listed. Reid, Ricky, Megan, and Meitar are going to be going in that order. And they're going to introduce themselves, and then each of them is going to come, we're going to come back, and each one of them is going to speak for 5 minutes. And I'm going to be really encouraging you to do 5 minutes and pay attention to the clock so that we have more opportunity for us to discuss as a group. And after they've finished talking, I've been asked to field some questions to them, which I have been given to field to them, which I can do. Or we can also open up for a conversation among all of us this evening. And I would like to then participate in that conversation because as an openly gay faculty member at Brown University teaching gender and sexuality, I have a lot of experience in thinking and insights about how that can happen here and all the challenges to doing those kinds of things at Brown. So, that being said, I'm going to ask if Reid would begin. I think you need to come over here so that we can get you streamed.
This is so much fun. So hi everybody, my name is Reid Mihalko. My 1 minute introduction is I was originally class of 90 here. So that Brown even lets me back 20 years later, I find hilarious. And then at the same time, like, I'm best known as the sex and relationship educator who created a media storm around a workshop called Cuddle Party, which is a workshop around non-sexual touch and affection. And now that that's 6 years later, we have cuddle parties in 5 different countries. It's been all over the media. SNL even did a skit about us, and the Stephen Colbert Report did a skit about Cuddle Party. Now I'm doing more edgy sex education because Cuddle Party is its own little organization, and now I'm doing a lot of work talking to college students, young adults, and older adults about sexual self-confidence and self-esteem and better health. And that's why I'm here tonight, because I was sucked into the part of this controversy because of a workshop that Megan and I did together. And thank you for having me.
And now Ricky.
My name is Ricky Bresch. I'm Senior Director for Student Engagement here at Brown University, and in that role, I provide coordination to the Student Activities Office, the Third World Center, Chaplain's Office, LGBTQ Resource Center, and the Sarah Women's Center. I've been doing university administration and student programming for about 15 years, and so that's why. And this was a situation, not unlike many, where student programming or student interests or student ideas kind of interface with the university, and I try to help people think that through. So hopefully I can help the group here today. Thanks.
And Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm also very short, despite my heels. So I work as a board-certified sexologist and sex educator. I recently opened the Center for Sexual Pleasure and Health, which came under attack for providing sex education for adults. And I've been working as a sex educator for over a decade. I used to work in family planning organizations, providing sex education for youth, and eventually moved into primarily doing sex education for adults because I realized that once people graduated high school, they were expected to know everything, and surprise, surprise, that's not the case. So I also work closely with medical schools and provide work as a GTA, which is a gynecological teaching associate, training medical providers how to give nice, happy, safe pelvic exams. So that's my job.
And Meitar, which means a string in Hebrew. Yeah, because we want to stream you.
Okay, let's do that. First of all, I love this microphone. Hi, my name is Meitar. My friends call me Maymay. It's the first syllable of my name repeated. I'm probably best known, not dissimilar from Reid, for co-founding a model of sexuality unconferences, which are very ad hoc conferences, essentially in the academic sense of the term, called King for All conferences. And we've had about 6 of these across the nation so far. One of them here was held by Brown Chic, the Sexual Health Education Empowerment Council. And it was organized by Aida, and when she told me that she wanted to do one of those events there, I was like, yes, awesome, go, do it. It's an open, free, to the public event, and a huge part of the philosophy around it is that it's transparent and on a model and not a sponsored organization. It's not a 501c3 or any kind of business or anything. So it's really just an idea, and anyone who has any initiative to take that idea and do something with it is welcome to. So that's what I'm best known here for. I spoke at that first event, King for All Providence, it was called, back in March. No, February. I know the months. And it was a great event, and it caused a lot of what it was involved in a lot of the controversy that later developed, and so that's why I'm here.
Great, so the idea now is for each of our panelists in order to speak about 5 minutes about the topic that they wish to raise, and then I'm going to, again, field some questions to them that they can answer, and then we'll open it up. So, first in the order that we originally started. Do you start, Megan? Yeah, please.
Awesome. So I'm Aida. I'm the chair of the Queer Alliance, I'm the chair of Chic, and I'm really involved with anything sexy, awesome at Brown. So Sex Week, the first year that it happened at Brown was last year. It was also a Chic project, and it sought to bring all the gender and sexuality groups on campus together to create an event where we could discuss sexuality in a variety of ways. So that happened last year, and this year we had it again because we didn't want to let it just slip off into nothingness. So I was wondering what other campuses had sex weeks, had similar events, because this, gathered up a big storm of controversy and all the things that we were doing. So I was like, well, what other campuses are doing this? Are they encountering some of the same problems? What's going on? So I looked into it. The most famous sex week, I think, at least in higher institutions of higher learning, is Sex Week at Yale, held by Sway, which is Sex Week at Yale, the group. And it was actually mentioned in some of the emails that we got saying, oh, you should stop doing that. You should stop doing all these things that you're doing at Brown because they corrupt everyone. And Yale, they were saying, you're going to turn into Yale, which I don't think that a lot of people would hate, maybe. But so we wanted to keep it very Brown. So we have our own entity, but we looked up to Yale because they had a sex week that was big and it was very well known. However, there are a lot of other schools that have sex weeks or events similar to that. So actually, Yale's sex week is not one of the oldest ones. It started in, this is the 5th one, so it started maybe 10 years ago because it's held every 2 years. But other universities have them. Columbia has it, Oberlin College has it, WashU St. Louis has it. So I'm just going to name a few other ones: Arizona State University, Southwestern Oregon Community College, Lafayette College. Things that we don't necessarily hear, especially in the Ivy League, because we're so conceited that we just care about the Ivy League. But there are a lot of other places, even in very, very conservative states, that have sex weeks, that also have faced controversy, but that also have a lot of support from their institutions and a lot of support from the student bodies where they take place. And one of the things that I saw that was very common in all the dialogues about sex weeks, there was a focus on talking. There was a focus on education. There was a focus on, let's talk about these things because we don't necessarily get to talk about them in a constructive way, in an educational way. We might say, oh yeah, so-and-so hooked up, but that has no educational value, I guess. So sex weeks are a way to foster that dialogue in a meaningful way, in a way that can foster health and wellness and pleasure and communication overall. And all their names also reflect this, because it's Sex Week, Safer Sex Week, Sexual Awareness, Sexual Health and Wellness Week. And we can see that it's not just, oh, we just want to talk about raunchy things and have fun, which is true, we do. But we also want to have conversations that are more meaningful than that. And these sex week also have in common that they want to engage students in a way that is creative and informative, and is not just, here's a diagram of a vagina, and there you go. And that's all the sex that they're going to get. So a lot of it is edgy and cutting edge and innovative, and that's also what gets a lot of people nervous. Because we are promoting the debauchery of our youth, and we're promoting corruption and all that. When in fact, if you talk to any organizer, what they'll usually say is, we want to foster dialogue, we want to foster education, we want people to get accurate information about their bodies and about how they work and how to be happy and safe, instead of just getting whatever the media throws at us. And a lot of the discussion is also centered on the fact that this has no place in an institution of higher learning, which I entirely disagree with, because if you go to university, you're not just there for the education that you will get in a classroom. You're there for the experience. You're there to talk to people. You're there to form yourself as an entire human being. And just like there are cultural weeks and weeks about X or Y, at least I personally believe that there should be a sex week, and there should be a week where we discuss these things, especially since we see this so much in the media. It does deserve a place in an institution of higher learning where we can discuss it in a very meaningful way, where we get accurate information instead of little random bits of knowledge that may contradict each other, may not make sense, and may be even harmful to our health. So that's where I'm coming from. And again, it was really interesting to look up how there were sex weeks that were like 13 and 20 years old, not at the Ivy League. Because a lot of it sometimes is a class issue where if an institution has more money or more padding, they can get away with more, or that because we have so much free time on our hands because of class issues or whatever, that we can talk about these things when it's actually not the case. And a lot of other schools have this, and there is a demand for it in other college campuses. So that's my short little spiel, and now we shall continue with the other presentations that are really exciting and have visuals and stuff.
So no visuals from me, unless I'm going to do like hand puppets or something like that. So I was really excited to be invited to speak on this panel for a lot of different reasons. One, coming from the background of Cuddle Party, launching a news story where New Yorkers are paying money to cuddle. And that's what the media wanted to cover was, oh my gosh, like it's gotten that bad. Like when New Yorkers start paying money to get hugs, the entire world is screwed and the apocalypse is coming. So I came out of sex education, collegiately speaking. I didn't know who I was yet. I was still a virgin when I got here. And, still in love with my high school girlfriend, and was gonna get married. And was like all excited. And now I've turned into this, non-monogamous sex educator freakazoid that runs around, teaching people how to cuddle and then running workshops, called Sex Educator Showdown. And mostly just getting people to start talking about relationships. And to me, I kind of live in this bubble where I talk about sex all the time. I was a bartender for 20 years. I started bartending when I was here to pay for school. I had cultural privilege to walk up to people and be like, so you're getting any? And I wouldn't get slapped. And then that all midwifed later into me discovering who I was in my own sexuality. And Brown was really important to that. And I think that colleges, period, are really important for human beings, if we're lucky enough to get to go to college, because not all of us can have that blessing or that curse. I know it's reading week right now for a lot of you. But the idea of having 4 years away from your parents to frolic and to figure out what's going on with your own sexuality, trying to understand other people, trying to understand your own body, and trying to understand other people's bodies is a lot to have happen all at once. And Judith Levine, in her book Harmful to Minors, talks about how this generation and the ones surrounding it are, for the most part, the least well-educated sex ed generation ever, because of a lot of the abstinence-only programming that was federally funded. And because in this wonky way, at least my parents didn't really talk about sex much. Granted, I'm older than a lot of you here, but I think there's a tendency for a lot of parents not to talk to their kids about sex because it's kind of weird for them because they didn't get talked to about sex from their parents. And it kind of gets passed down like it's this big tradition. And a lot of my job is to just get people talking about it, not make talking about sex feel like going to the dentist. And college, again, becomes this really important place where, oh my God, it's like sex week? There's a whole week that we get to talk about this? And it's about giving people permission to start talking about it. And what happens with not just young adults, but adults now, is we're so starved for sex information that's useful. And we're visual learners, so many of us, that now we have the internets. And we're getting, the interwebs, we're getting a lot of our information from porn, which is a horrible teaching medium. Like watching porn to learn how to be better in bed and have better relationships is like watching The Fast and the Furious to learn how to drive. Like Tokyo Drift. Like it's horrible. And this is why these conversations are so important. in universities, in your high school systems, you know, for those of you who want to go back to your hometowns and start conversations up in high school. We didn't have that in my high school. And when I went here at Brown, we had Condom Week, which was the big, you know, ooh, Condom Week, a whole week about condoms, and sex and safer sex. And, you know, these conversations are so important. And what I've been noticing, traveling around the country, talking about sex to adults and to young adults, is that the show and tell stuff is really the stuff that freaks people out. Because we're now just as a culture getting kind of okay talking about sex. And, you know, having young adults talking about sex, but the minute somebody whips out like a flogger and starts spanking somebody up in the front of the room, everybody else starts getting uncomfortable. And it's not necessarily the young adults, it's the people who have jobs at stake, or the people that are, you know, for good or for bad, trying to get media attention because they're going to be loud and voice that they have a problem with something. And I have no problem with people voicing that they have a problem with something. What I have a problem with is people trying to shut down the conversation, period. And, you know, if I was talking to a bunch of 12-year-olds, I might be a little bit different about, well, you know, should 12-year-olds be programming their own sex education? But we're not. We're talking to, you know, people that are 17, if you got here early, you know, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I got out of here when I was 22 and a half. 5-year plan, thank you. But this idea of like, ask questions, get to talking about what you want to talk about, because you're the ones who need the information. I can tell you what I'm into and give you some advice for things that helped me navigate my relationships, but ultimately, it's your body, it's your relationship. So you're the ones who need to be creating the programming, and I think that's where it starts to get scary for people. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because the people that bring the programming to the college campuses are the ones who are really excited, or know the channels, you know, to be able to get funding or get approval to rent the room to have the flogging happen up in front of the room. You know, and that's not everybody too. So I think some of the sex education that comes into the universities may not be necessarily representative of what everybody's curious about, but we can broaden that representation. You know, because me sitting up here with a banana, putting a condom on it, is probably not going to freak out the conservatives as much as me whipping out rope and tying somebody and hanging them from the front porch of a frat, like what happened at Yale Sex Week with Madison Young. Like, that was the thing that tweaked everybody. The room wasn't available because structurally they couldn't hang her from the ceiling in this, you know, funky little bondage position. So they're like, well, where can we hang her from something? And somebody's like, dude, my frat! And they're like, awesome! And then they run, and it's the front porch that's facing the street. You know, and they're like people going by with strollers. You know, and then that was what really got people wigged out, I think. So these are some of the things I would like to talk about for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
So I think probably don't have content expertise in terms of the topic that you're discussing about, but more institutional knowledge. And what I was asked to speak about is a little bit of how the university in general thinks about student programming in response to student programming interests. And I think it all really starts from the university really stays focused on what our mission is. We're here to be an educational institution. At all times, we need to kind of keep that at the forefront. But that also means that, so when students are interested in doing something, there's a few different aspects of a program in general. One is to think about the content. Another is, and the other is what I would call non-content parameters. And I think, you know, when we think about content in a university context, we have to be very careful because in an environment where free speech is encouraged, we're very much sort of beholden to really empowering each learner to make some decisions for themselves about both what they're interested in exploring, but also they can choose to participate in whatever's being offered or not. You can choose to take a class or you can choose not to take it. You can choose to participate in an event or not. And we both apply that inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So that's a piece where we really try to empower the learner to make decisions about their own content. And I'll talk about that sort of briefly in terms of how that relates to when you construct an event, some things that we look for you to be able to do. The university really then is focusing a lot on non-content parameters when we're looking at student events and programs. Things like safety or risk or liability. And part of a student educational experience is ensuring that when you're constructing your events and programs that you're thinking about those issues as well. And usually what we do is we're really expecting a student organization or a student group to be very familiar with university policies, and we'll help them with that. And also safety, risk, and liability issues. And we really then work with them to develop a plan. And the plan really becomes not so much the guide on the content they're delivering, but really the way in which they're going to deliver that content. And then students really are held accountable to that, and that's where the educational process comes in. If you put together a plan and then do not stick to it, or you deviate from it, then that's where accountability and responsibility and liability can lie. We do have processes for that. And typically, if after there's a student program event, we get complaints or concerns, or we have an indication that something maybe didn't follow a plan the way it was supposed to, like, for example, if you're going to record people, they really have to have the opportunity to know they're being recorded and have the opportunity to opt out of that, either by not participating in the event or opting. And so if you say that's what you're going to do and then you don't follow through on it, that's kind of where universities has more of an issue. A few other thoughts that I wanted to make here. The other thing the university has to be really thoughtful about is use of university resources. There was a couple comments made, and there was a few parts of this particular situation that I think was sort of intriguing. But there are people that want access to university resources that aren't part of the university community. They're not students, faculty, or staff here. They want to use university space. They want to gain access to students. And the university makes decisions about which organizations, so the student government, for example, recognizes organizations, and really they have their own purpose, and we're expecting that groups are then living by their purpose, and that they have responsibility for that. So you're the member of the university community that's responsible to the university. So we really try to also be sure that, that in fact it is a university event and program that's using university space. What are the parameters on sponsorship? I think one of the interesting things I have in this situation is sort of an outside collaborator who isn't a legal entity other than being an individual. And that's not by accident, that's intentional. But that also presents problems when you're an institution that has legal parameters and exists sort of in a legal context. So that's, I think, an interesting thing that sort of plays out. So we do try to be very careful about who's accessing university space. You can use university space as an outside user. You can pay rental fees. Then you're kind of responsible. You have a relationship with the university that's legal in nature. But if you want to then sort of operate, have student groups front for you or those kinds of things, that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. So when we're working with a student group that is collaborating with other entities, either whether on or off campus, we really try to ask questions about the sponsorship and how involved is everyone in the program. What are the parameters of that? And really, are the students making the decision making? Are they the ones involved in the decision making process? And are they leading the process? I think those are the kind of general parameters that when people like Ida walk into my office and start to sort of talk to me about a situation, that's kind of the framework that I bring to it. If people have questions, we can certainly talk more about it later. So that helps. Okay. Thanks.
Because we gotta think different.
I like pictures, so we're gonna look at pictures. Great. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is I left working with youth-based individuals in terms of sex education because I was tired of the politics of what you could teach in school systems and what you couldn't. I had no idea how many more political issues I was going to run into working with adults. It has increased tenfold in my world. And when we think about comprehensive sex education, usually we're talking about the right to teach about condoms in school systems, and we forget about the pleasure-based aspects of teaching about sex. And so that's really what I focus in on. And a lot of people will label that as talking about taboo topics. So yes, during Condom Week, it's considered okay to teach people about how to put a condom on, a banana. But if you teach people how to put a condom on with your mouth, then you're getting into serious issues of like, are you promoting sexual behavior and oral sex? That's a question that I've been asked. Are you actually promoting people to have oral sex? If it's consensual, then yes, I am.
But only bananas.
Oh, but yes.
Bananas can't consent.
And so much of the work that I do, I love Post Secret. So I'm going to be using a lot of Post Secret images. And Post Secret, if you don't know, is a weekly blog that posts images of secrets that people send in from around the world to this man named Frank, and he posts them on his website. And so this is one of them. I'm still way too afraid to have sex. And most of the work that I do is reducing fears about sexuality. Whether it's working with school-aged individuals, youth-based, or working with adults. Most of the work that I do is calming people down about the way that their bodies feel, or the way that their bodies are acting, or the thoughts that they're having. So sex education, in my world, is about risk reduction, making people safe and making people happy. And there are various ways that we can do that. 82% of Americans believe in sex education, comprehensive sex education. Now the fun thing is each state gets to decide what exactly that means for comprehensive sex education. And for some states, that means not talking about condoms. For some states, that means talking about birth control options. And for some states, that means recognizing individuals are gay. So, there are various different ways that we look at sex education, and that was sarcasm that I was using, so I do appreciate laughing at certain things. The fundamentals in terms of sex education is we really want to be looking at sexuality in a holistic type of viewpoint, and sex education really kind of sex educators have to break it down because there's so much that we can learn about, and our society tends to focus in on the racier aspects of sexuality, the sexualization which gets deemed as bad. And sexualization isn't actually bad, it's how you frame things. But as a concept, it doesn't have to be bad. In school systems, we look at sexual health and reproduction. That's the one that really gets a lot of focus, is sexual health and reproduction. But sensuality, usually that's talked about when we're dealing with individuals in nursing homes or in marriage discussions. But we don't talk about sensuality as a whole in our society very often outside of those contexts. Intimacy, we have intimacy classes, but we're still struggling to talk about different levels of intimacy, and there are various different degrees of it. It can range from BDSM, it can range from holding hands, so there are lots of different options in terms of how to be intimate with people. And we're still fighting for comprehensive sex education. This is Scott. Do you know Scott? Scott is the DA from Wisconsin who sent a letter out to all of the health educators saying that if they dare to teach about barrier methods in the state mandated sex education, this was last month, he was going to arrest them. This was last month. So this is Scott. I like to show Scott's picture because he's doing great work in the world. Let me be very clear about this. Sex education does not increase the chances of people doing it. It does not increase the amount of times that they do it. And it does not increase their sexual partners. It merely talks about sex. That's all it does. Now, what you choose to do with that information is your own business. But sex education, just like history education or mathematics, it's a personal decision. I was told over and over that I was going to have to know algebra. I don't use algebra in my daily life at all. And that's a personal choice that I made. So what sex education does work to do is to get people talking about sex, and we work really hard to make parents the primary sex educators. But if people aren't comfortable talking about sex, or they don't have the information to talk about it, they can't talk to their kids about it. So then it becomes scary because now some stranger is talking about sex education or sex. We're trying to build sexually healthy adults, and we're trying to help people establish their own values. This is the thing that I think is so interesting. Just because I talk about something does not mean I'm saying go out and do it. One of the reasons that I work as a sex educator is to help people figure out what's their scooching point. Like, what's the point where I don't know how I feel about that. Because understanding what that point is makes them able to make informed choices. And that's primarily about the work that I do. And I learn these things on a daily basis. There's a, I'll talk about that in a second. These are some images that came up from Post-Secret. I collect the sex and gender and sexual assault pictures. I have a butthole phobia. If my boyfriend even gets close to touching it, I freak out and start crying. That I want to do risk reduction for. Like, okay, so this person has fear about their bum. Let's figure out how we can prevent them from crying. So don't touch the butt. Like, Post-Secret is a great way for people to start talking about what makes them uncomfortable. And so I love showing this because this shows a risk reduction model of putting it out in the open can help foster communication to alleviate fears. I'm afraid to have sex of any kind because I have a hanging labia, and I'm afraid that anyone who saw it would be grossed out like I am. If we teach about the variations of anatomy, then we can help normalize the way that people look and feel about their bodies. Because when you're only presented with one image of how bodies look, it can cause people to freak out. And of course, I had to have something about penis obsession. Had to. Also, some of the work that I do is talking about the taboos of fantasies. So I recently came under attack because I talked about fantasies. And the wonderful thing about fantasies is they stay in your head. And you can choose to think about them all day long and no one's going to get hurt. That's the great, great thing about fantasies. I had a conversation with a dear friend who was talking about at supper about eating meat. I'm a vegetarian, and so I don't allow anyone to eat meat in front of me of certain types. And the waitress said out loud what the meat was, and I was like, nope, can't order that now to my friend. And the person after the waitress left said, you know, I thought about ordering a different meal that had the same meat in it, but I didn't. And I was like, wow, that's really great. That's the difference between fantasy and behavior, right there. And just sometimes talking about fantasies gets people really worked up. And again, fantasies are different than behaviors. This comes through in terms of, this is an actual situation that happened. Risk reduction model. If we teach people how to safely play, they will not hurt themselves. But last year, someone, last March, decided, because they did not have information on how to properly use sex toys or what sex toys are made of, put a dildo on a jigsaw and then plug the jigsaw in as the jigsaw was in their body. And it caused the person to go to the hospital. But the great thing about this bad situation is when they were met with the media, the first thing that the woman said was, it was consensual sexual behavior. It just went very, very badly. But if we had given that person more access to sex education, maybe this accident wouldn't have happened. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to point out that sometimes what we talk about as sex educators or history professors or economics professors, you're not going to like the information. And that's good for you to realize what you like and what you don't like. Talking about it does not encourage behavior. It merely fosters communication. And values, for the love of God, are different than facts. This is a lovely picture of the government has been working really, really hard for many, many years since Nixon to try to prove the correlation between pornography and rape, increasing rape. And there have been 2 very large studies that have taken place on government dollars trying to show how there's a connection. And both times they have failed to show the correlation. And this I love is the Mies report where he has to deliver the information that says, no, actually pornography does not show to increase rape. And sometimes we don't like to hear what the truth is, but it can keep us safer and calm us down. Just like this. My wife of 5 years was sickened, shocked, and hurt when she uncovered my occasional forays into phone sex. But she's still here, we're working it out, and since then she's been dynamite in the sacks. So communication can really help things. And sometimes terrible situations or uncomfortable situations can make amazing moments down the road. So that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, I'm gonna use it as well. Thanks to me, Aida. Well done. So some of the Twitter back channels, you guys are preaching to the choir, and that's true. And we invited everyone to this panel because it was an open to the public event, including our detractors. And I hope that if you are listening out there, that you join us perhaps by tweeting with the hashtag #SexPanic or by watching the live stream. There's a chat room up there as well. So feel free to jump in, anyone who is listening. Yeah, because we're after dialogue, not a choir. So, mine, if I can just start this up. I've been tweeting as well. I apologize for my lack of being immediately prepared. Is that working? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's start this thing. Right. Before I start, I do want to say just thank you very much to both Brown University for being incredibly courageous in offering a space to have these kind of conversations, and to Chic for sponsoring how many events now, like way more than I can keep track of myself. I don't even go to the school, but a lot. And so just thank you both. You guys have been doing an amazing job, and you deserve our congratulations, and you just congratulate yourself. So well done. My talk is called Certain... Yeah! All right. Yeah, so my talk is it's called Certain Unalienable Rights. And I want to talk a little bit about this freedom of expression and how that relates to sexuality and how that relates to very fundamental freedoms that you and I need to support, I think, for this country to be what it is. This picture of women arranged in rows like sculptures wearing burqas really makes me feel pretty angry sometimes. This picture of women's bodies on display at newsstands across America also makes me feel pretty angry sometimes. Both pictures, I think, cut straight to the core of an issue that is so central to humanity's existence that religions, governments, and ideologies have made efforts to control what you and I say, want, and think. And I'm talking, of course, I'm talking about sex. In 2001, only a few hours from here at Wesleyan University, David J., founder of the Asexuality, Visibility, and Education Network, AVEN, said, "Sexuality is like any other activity. There are people for whom skydiving, chocolate cake, and soccer are their world. But some people don't like these things. There's no reason to focus your energy and attention on something you feel no reason to do anything about." Now, as a sexual freedom activist myself, I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about sex. That's why David and other local asexuals like him absolutely fascinating. I mean, here's a group of people whose self-identity revolves around the lack of sexual attraction. So after reading the work of people so different from myself, how could I not ask, what is it that motivates us to do what it is that we do? And in contemplating this, I kept getting drawn to this quote's last sentence. "There's no reason to focus your energy and attention on something you feel no reason to do anything about." So why is it that some asexuals feel a reason to talk about sexuality as much as I, a sexual person, does? And although it probably sounds pretty corny, I think the answer is actually really simple. It's pretty clear. Feelings. Right? In 2009, Eve Ensler, author of the Vagina Monologues and founder of V-Day, the international movement to end violence against women and girls, said, "Emotions have inherent logic, which lead to radical, appropriate, saving action." Now, in mathematics and linguistics, the word radical means root, as in square root, or root of the word. African-American feminist and political activist Angela Davis famously said that radical simply means grasping things at the root. So in other words, the root of radical action is emotion. Now, this is important because the panel that we're about to have is in many ways about sex. And for many people, myself included, it is difficult, if not impossible, to discuss sexuality separate from emotion. In fact, merely discussing sexuality openly is itself viewed by many people as a radical act, and in some cases, empowering others to talk openly about sexuality is considered criminal. We're watching scenes from several past King conferences. Myself and my friends on this panel have been called sexual predators, pedophiles, and human traffickers because of the things that we've said, the discussion tools that we've built, and the livelihoods that we've created. Now, as before, I'm left asking, what is it that motivates us to do whatever it is that we do? And as I've been contemplating this over the past couple months, I've come to the realization that despite how false and hurtful it is to hear these things said about you, it's very important that these people have the right to voice their opinions. This is a lesson that I know Brown University learned very well some time ago. On October 18, 1990, Brown undergraduate student Doug Hahn shouted racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic remarks on campus while drunk and celebrating his 21st birthday. That year, the Brown University Disciplinary Council expelled Hahn for hate speech, which prompted the ACLU to object, citing First Amendment concerns. It may jar you to learn that the ACLU would defend so-called hate speech under the First Amendment. And since words are exceptionally powerful things, I want to define hate before I get too far. So according to the dictionary, hate is the emotion of intense dislike, a feeling of dislike so strong that it demands action. To me, this has two things. First, it reminds me that, just like love, hate can be so powerful that it forces us to act in ways we wouldn't have otherwise considered. Second, that both liking and disliking something are equally valid emotions to have, regardless of the subject at hand. For instance, I can't stand using Windows-based computers. I do whatever I can to avoid the slush in New York City after it snows, and I hate going to pretentious art galleries. Now, I may hate these things, but you don't have to hate them too. Now, that freedom to choose what one likes or dislikes is inborn to humanity. No matter what, no one can choose your desires for you. Unquestionably, hate has been one of the driving forces behind human action throughout history. And I think just as we do for love, we ought to credit it for that, not blame it. Action is what got us humans out of caves and into this spectacular structure called Brown University. Maybe cavemen really hated caves. Action is part of how society evolves. Action is, after all, the root of activism. Now, this right to choose how we feel and what we hate is what the Declaration of Independence calls unalienable human rights. In order to institutionalize the protection of these rights for themselves and future generations, which would be all of us now, and our children's 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 children, people wrote a code of conduct we know as the Constitution of the United States. This institution is known as government, and its creation forged a distinction between unalienable human rights and other rights, such as political and legal rights. As political theorist Hannah Arendt said, Even political rights, like the right to vote, and nearly all other rights enumerated in the Constitution are secondary to the unalienable human rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence. In other words, government's role is expressly intended to protect the liberty of its citizens, which, if we are to have liberty, must include the right to choose and express our likes and our dislikes, no matter how vehemently we or others may feel about them. In objecting to the expulsion of Douglas Hahn in 1991, book critic for the Washington Post, Jonathan Yardley, wrote this: "Of course it's offensive, repugnant, contemptible, loathsome, whatever you want to call it, for a college student or anyone else to go into a public place and shout words such as those used by Douglas Hahn in his little scene last fall. But displays such as that are among the prices we pay for being not merely a free country, but one of unexampled heterogeneity." Did Hahn deserve to face consequences for his behavior? Absolutely. He surely faced social repercussions as a consequence of his hateful speech, and I hope that others' obvious dislike of him had some positive impact. But his case shows that the freedom that you and I have to say what we want and think what we like is an incredibly precious gift that must be protected. That's the foundation of freedom of speech. Don't get me wrong, I hate hate speech. I hate hating. And yet there I am, hating it, hating how much I'm hating it, and hating it for making me hate it. So if I continue to simplistically believe that hate has no value, how could I feel like a worthy person now? Right? How could I forgive myself for feeling such hate? And how could I learn to be joyous and to love? Maybe these people who hate have trouble seeing what a good and worthwhile person they are. While I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you today, someone I don't even know responded to the blog posts I wrote about being called a sexual predator with this: "Most of your accusers are probably really good people, just warped and made angry by fear and oppression themselves. But that doesn't excuse perpetuating those fears and passing them on to others. It's like the cycle of abuse. The buck has to stop somewhere." Will it stop with you? I think all violence is an opportunity for growth. All hatred, opportunities for action. This is no different. The last time I spoke at Brown University was at a sexuality conference called King for All Providence. People with destructive goals, I said, are usually people who feel personally disempowered. So to be creative, you need to empower everyone to speak up, to have a presence, even people you don't totally agree with. In other words, the solution to bad speech is more speech, not less. In his 1999 talk, Censorship and the Fear of Sexuality, Dr. Marty Klein said, "Most Americans do not want to discuss sexual issues rationally. Their sexuality poisoned by the culture, they just want their emotional pain taken away. To people afraid of sexuality, censorship looks attractive. It appears to be a solution to the pain. This pain, this fear of sexuality, leads people to support censorship." Now sometimes when I talk about sex, people get very uncomfortable. Their reaction can even become hate. Hatred at feeling uncomfortable, hatred at being reminded of their fears, or perhaps hatred at a culture that so thoroughly disempowers so many people that they don't even have a clear idea of where to constructively direct their hatred. People will often argue that certain things they disagree with are simply wrong. But if America has taught me one thing, it is that harmony and unity cannot be achieved through homogeneity and sameness, but through diversity and through difference. Your freedom to like vanilla and my freedom to like, we'll say chocolate, is the reason not only why Haagen-Dazs is in business, but why Ben & Jerry's can peacefully coexist next door. And that's why I have to come back to this question. Is this endemic sexualization of women, which supports a double standard equally costly for men, any better than this coercive modesty? And if not, is the solution more sexual censorship? Is the solution really more of someone else telling you what you should think, or say, or see, or do? Or will we overcome oppression through education, self-empowerment, and ultimately freedom of expression? And that's what this panel is going to be about for me. So I thank you very, 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 very much for participating in it. That's a little bit long, sorry.
I just bought a Mac. I'm excited to do PowerPoints like you do.
People who know my classes know I love PowerPoint, but I just upgrade it. So the idea now is for me to pose questions to the panelists, and then they're going to comment. But I don't know if that's where we really want to go. Maybe I'm going to take my prerogative, because it seems, I have two thoughts. First of all, please ask me to address the letter that you need to address to whoever you need to address the next time to defend what you guys do, because if this is representative, and I don't think you're doing this for a show of what you do here at Brown and other places, it's great. And I really want to applaud all of you for the kind of ways that you're, not just the staff at Brown and what they're doing and what the Queer Alliance and people are doing and what you all are doing as sex educators in all different kinds of ways. It's really important, and I really applaud your work. So let me get down with I can only understand the, and I tried to understand by reading the material that you sent me, that the anxieties and the panic that is happening is rooted in either a lot of people's individual issues about their own feelings about themselves, their bodies, their sexuality, or it's driven by self-promotion or some ideological agenda which is larger, in which a person then becomes important in Rhode Island or beyond by taking very radical and very conservative stand, or something else to play. However, I'm going to pose one question here that our last speaker raised, which is very important to me, because in 1969 I became a feminist, and I came out as a gay man in 1973, and feminism for me in the late 60s was the vehicle for which I could deconstruct and understand gender roles don't have to be as they're traditionally appointed to us as we're growing up. And I had figured that out intuitively, but it required an ideology to really legitimize the individual thoughts that I had. So I want to ask a question to anyone on the panel, and then I think I'd like to open it up for people to ask other questions. What are the limits? What is the far-reaching place we can go appropriately in talking about sex, especially given the very convincing argument on one hand that censorship does not solve problems, but on the other hand, ways in which talking about or promoting or discussing certain kinds of activities can actually reinforce them potentially or legitimize them in society. And so I'm thinking of certain kinds of violence against women, but I'm going to ask it in a more open way. And I think this speaks to the last question I was asked to ask, and one of the first ones about what is kind of the edgiest thing that you think you can deal with. So maybe people could address that on the panel. That's a very quick question. And then after that, I'd like to see if people in the audience want to ask questions or discuss something. So, anyone want to come up and talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll
Sure.
go first, just real quick.
Yeah, you can. We're actually streaming even if you're not up there. So
Yeah.
You can
Well, I'll give
say,
up.
we're moving the,
Well, I'll sit, because that way we can jump around.
Yeah, that'll be easier. And people can hear, so we don't have a
Yeah.
microphone issue, do we? We're okay with the microphone?
I was a trained thespian at Brown. I was injected into the room. Actually, I was an art major, so go figure. Get it? Figure. Thank you for laughing. I put a lot of thought into this. Because Cuddle Party being non-sexual, then I turned it into a nonprofit with the help of some friends, so that I could do edgier sex education. And now I do, PG-13 things, where it's like talking about romance, how do you be more romantic, how do you be more effective in dating, and figure out your boundaries and your agreements. And then I teach like rated R workshops, like how do you have a successful threesome, because it's zany and it's goofy and people are like, what? And I have like live demonstrations, like people were in their clothes, doing like the threesome Karma Sutra, because like it's just about making sex and talking about it fun. And then there's the NC-17 stuff where, there are some things for me as a sex educator, it's easier for me to teach you if I show you on a living, breathing person, and you get to ask questions of both of us. And that's really, really edgy stuff that people are getting lots and lots out of. But part of my job as an educator is also role modeling good communication skills and creating context powerfully so that people can opt in or opt out, as you're saying, and also not have complete freak out. And I think that the edgiest stuff for me starts to become sex educators who live in a bubble where they're talking and hanging out with other sex geeks and porn stars and other sex educators all the time, and they don't realize that it might be a little startling at dinner to talk about fisting. And there's this idea of, there's a difference between sex negativism and sex positivism, and then there's sex neutral, which there are a couple of organizations in San Francisco that teach from a sex neutral perspective, and I'm blanking on the name, it will come to me in a second, the organization, but basically what they do is they give facts, like, well, people are like, well, so my partner wants to fist me, and I'm calling the hotline, and like, what do I do? And they're like, well, you know, most people, you know, engage in this kind of hand sex stuff, this international symbol for hand sex, and that some people enjoy this and some people don't enjoy this. And what they're doing is they're kind of coming from a neutral perspective and letting the person on the phone figure out what they need to figure out, rather than sex educators who are so unaware of being sex positive that they're like, oh my God, fisting is awesome! Not realizing that the person on the other end of the line is freaking out about it. And now there's this added pressure of, oh, I'm not evolved enough to like this. And that's where, you know, the edge for me is educators teaching anybody who aren't realizing that they may be unintentionally creating pressure by being so positive about things. And I think that, I suspect that some of the conservative backlash is that that's what some people sense, that you're advocating this behavior. And that triggers their flip switch in them. That's my comment on that.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
So there's this widespread insinuation that somehow sex positive activists are completely blind to matters of the heart, or are socially inept, or aren't able to have any kind of empathy or compassion. I'm not sure where that comes from. It's a little insulting, but it's pretty widespread, and maybe some of that is in reference to like the enthusiasm that many of us can bring to the stuff that we do, because everyone brings anyone who does what they love is going to love it, you know. And if you love thinking and talking about sex, you're going to be your eyes are going to light up, and you're just going to have a good time, and that's very obvious, and that can be scary to a lot of people. I think that Megan, you spoke to values earlier on, and one of the things that I took away from your talk that I found incredibly valuable and very relevant to this is, when people say, some lines shouldn't be crossed, something is too far, that can't be okay. And I'm like, great, I'm glad you know where your line is. For an amazing campaign about this, check out whereisyourline.com. If you haven't yet, it's a fantastic campaign. It talks about the fact that people's lines that shouldn't be crossed are for them to decide. And that comes back to this idea that, yeah, absolutely some lines should be crossed. I don't want anyone kissing me who I don't want to be kissing. Period. That's not an edgy thing, but I don't want that because I don't want that. And I get to say, that's not okay. That's a line that I don't want to be crossed with someone who I'm not emotionally involved with, not intimate with, in some other capacity who I don't already know, whatever it is. The things that I do personally, the kinds of sex that I have is incredibly edgy to a lot of people. And to others, it's not. And that difference right there, that fact that is variable based on who you are, on the time that you live in, on the culture that you're from, all of those things showcase the truth, I think, that kind of notion of obscenity, that thing is obscene, whereas this thing is not. That's a false dichotomy. There's no question that some of those things are not thought about the same way in brains other than yours. And so if you don't give people the choice to make their own, to make where their lines, to choose where their lines are, that would I think that supports this top-down, what I feel is relatively oppressive, just because I'm not in the mainstream, notion of what line shouldn't or shouldn't be crossed. The bottom line is I think no means no, and yes means yes. And if you're doing something with someone who says no, and who hasn't given consent, and who believes you are harming. You know, if you're with somebody and they believe you're harming you, that would be the line I would never want to see crossed. And I think that although we can talk a ton about multicultural relativism and how it affects different places in the world, I think that there are definitely certain activities and certain things that reliably lead to needless human suffering. And I think that empowering people to make the choice via the access of information about what they want to do, to think about, and to say, is not one of those things that leads to needless human suffering. I think that's, although, you know, that's exactly what this panel is about discussing, and many people would disagree with me, and that's great, and that diversity, again, proves the point, I think.
I think that speaks to the need for education in the first place. Because again, how will you know where your line is if you have no idea about anything? And I think that's at least where I stand on this issue, and that's why I do the kinds of activism that I do on campus and off campus, because I want to disseminate information. And one of the things that you spoke about was morals and values and all these judgments. And one of the things that really gets my blood boiling is when detractors of any stripe, I guess, say that, oh, a lot of sex educators have no morals. They have no values. When what they actually mean is they have values that are different from mine. They have morals that are different from mine. And I think that the way to start talking about it differently is to realize when these things are said what you really mean. So again, I just hate it when someone says, oh, you have no morals. No, I do. I have values. I have morals. They're just different. And acknowledging that difference can only happen when there is constructive dialogue happening, when there is communication. And censorship is the opposite of that, because that closes communication. That closes the channel of, let me see what I like, let me see what you like, let me see what's out there. And again, in terms of lines that are too far, again, harm reduction. If you're harming someone that doesn't want to be harmed, I guess. If you're doing something non-consensual, if you're infringing upon another person's space or rights, then that's, I think, is the problem. But just by talking about something, that doesn't necessarily mean, again, like Megan said, just because I'm talking about something, just because I'm giving you information about it, that doesn't mean I'm saying, yeah, go do it. Go have sex with X, Y, Z, or an object, or an animal, or a person, or something. You have to be informed, and just because you're getting information doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to do it. You know, if you learn about alcohol, or if you learn about what alcohol can do to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go out and get smashed and, like, run over a baby. So, again, but it's been said. But it doesn't, like, just because, say, someone talks about sex trafficking, it doesn't mean that they're a sex trafficker. Because someone says something, it doesn't mean that they're promoting it. Again, so what we do, a lot of us on this panel, is promote education and promote dialogue. Yeah, so I guess that's
I think my edge, or my line, I'm coming at from a little bit of a different perspective in terms of, is my certification board going to be okay with what I'm saying? Because there's not many sex educators who, if they have been certified through governing boards, will speak about the racier topics, which include fantasies or certain behaviors, because is your community going to support you? I mean, how many professionals want to be like, yeah, let's talk about, you know, butt fucking. I'll support you for your right to talk about anal sex. There's not that many people who are going to publicly come out and be like, yes, as a professional, I am going to support that.
I'll support you.
Thank you. So, as in my role, like, that's where the edge comes. Like, how far can I do risk reduction behavior? How far can I go in terms of alleviating people's fears and still keep my job as an independent sex educator? So I come at it from a little bit of a different, I think, more more of a fear-based model.
Well, which is useful because like people are scared. Like, and for me, a lot of what I try to, like when I design my workshops, the signal I'm looking for, and when I go to other people's workshops and presentations, is it holographic? Like, is what you're telling me role modeling all the skill sets that are useful in sex and relationships, period? You know, Cuddle Party isn't about sex. It's a non-sexual event. It's a great workshop, by the way. But all the communication skill sets are the same skill sets I talk about when I'm teaching, you know, whatever kooky workshop, you know, on deep throating or dental dam use. Like, it's the same stuff, because if you don't know how to speak up, or even start to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, and then communicate it, then it's a crapshoot. And so understanding fear, for me as a coach and as a teacher, allows me to be like, yeah, I'm scared too. And I get why you're scared, so let's talk about fear. You know, and inviting, you know, other people to be at this talk tonight who you know, were a no to come in. I was, you know, upset a little bit, because how much more fun, even though it's awkward and maybe a little bit emotional, to have people who are like, no, screw that, I disagree. That's wrong. And then I, as a geek, get all excited because I'm like, now we're having a conversation. This is fun. My mom and dad never talk like that. So this kind of stuff gets me excited. And I can only imagine what it's like, you know, when you have, you know, everything's possible in the world and I want to do this. And you're like,
Well, there's 6,000 of them too.
yeah.
But I think in some ways, I think when you're existing in community context, it's also somewhat self-regulating. I mean, the reality is that students bring what they're interested in, they explore it, they can tap into the university's resources to do that. Those resources exist for the students that are part of this community. And there's also some, you know, Chic is a recognized student group. It's led by students. It was recognized by the student government. You know, some groups go through that process and they stumble along the way, but that's all part of the conversation about what is it that we all think this learning community should be about. And I think it's Brown's obligation to be sure that that everyone's voice has an opportunity to be heard.
I think also that there's several topics all like wrapped into this, and I really like the phrase that if knowledge is power, learning is self-empowerment. It's gotta be. I think it's gotta be framed that way, and for me, a lot of it comes down to self-empowerment. That's what I spoke about before. You know your line, and all that. And I think that a big part of self-empowerment is being able to say and define the distinction between what is uncomfortable or offensive and what is harmful. Because nobody has a right to live unoffended. I'm sorry, you don't. No one has the right to live free of fear. You have the right to try to live free of fear, but fear is really useful in a lot of situations. That's why we have it. That's why it's there. We've been brought up to fear things like poison. Good. I'm glad about that. That's useful to me, and I don't want to lose that. So I think that, you know, defining the distinction between, you know, I'm afraid of this, and therefore it should not be, versus I'm afraid of this, so let's learn more about it. I mean, I'm a Trekkie. How much you like, you know, where no one has gone before, right? That's all about exploration and interest in not knowing what you're dealing with and then figuring it out. So I love that, and I think that that's really important. And colleges, especially, all educational institutions, but colleges have a huge role in that. And that's why I say like learning is self-empowerment, because if knowledge is power, learning is self-empowerment. You end up with this ability to really critically think about the nuances of how you're feeling and what you're able and to do about that. And there are two kinds of freedom, right? There's freedom from, and there's freedom to. They're not mutually exclusive, and they can support each other. So taking away someone's freedom to speak, for example, takes away your freedom from your opportunity to learn more about anything like that. It takes away, what I'm trying to say is they're like sine waves, they'll cancel each other out if you don't have one.
Yeah.
You don't have one. Yeah.
From a university perspective, where's the line? What's too far? Like, how do you guys decide? or not like power over, but like when does the university go, oh shit?
Depends on who you are. You know, I think that there are, you know, everybody has a role. There are people who are responsible for government relations, and there are people responsible for donor relations. There are people responsible for general counsel and legal counsel. Everybody has their own, and it tends to be a collaborative decision-making process. I can say that I've never run. One situation I can remember is a student group that wanted to fire juggle inside a building, and they really wanted to do it. And I was absolutely confident. I was like, there is no way you're going to be able to do this. So, you know, so we had to come up with some way they could do it outside. But yeah, I think, by and large, on my end, things get they stumble not on the content of what people are interested in. It would stumble on other parameters. Either they don't have, it's not really the student group that's sponsoring it, or that there's not either a student organization behind it, or you know, they don't have the funding for whatever it might be. Like, it sort of ends up running into those things. And so we tend to stay focused on, my role is usually to stay focused, what are you trying to accomplish? Why are you interested in that? And then how to go about doing that within the context that we have. You know, we have legal parameters, we have, you know, limitations of what can happen in buildings in terms of safety. So it tends to run into those kinds of things. You know, as you can see, I mean, Brown is a place where a lot of different things happen.
And just that holography piece is like what you just said is actually decent guidelines for like what happens in your bedroom. Like, why is this interesting to you? Why do you want to do it? What are the legal ramifications of doing this in my parents' home on a Sunday morning before they wake up? Like it's and that's, for me, that's the stuff that's important, is like know where your lines are and be able to communicate it, and then then you can start to have a dialogue.
But it's also about existing in a society and in a context. You know, I mean, this is part of, I think part of also being on a college campus is learning and how to negotiate and work with others and to exist within a community context. And that's a lot of what this is about.
Do we have a couple of questions? Yeah, first.
How have you dealt with it when people object to the education that you are providing?
Freak out.
Yeah.
The first reaction, at least for me, is freak out. Because it's scary when people say bad things about you. Most people don't walk around and they're like, I want somebody to say really nasty things about me today.
I know those people.
All subs. Not all subs. As soon as you said that, half the room started imagining things impossible.
And then I think you have to, at least for me, you gather the people that are supportive, that do the similar work that you do, and you're like, okay, was I out in left field for talking about this? And do check-ins, and then compose your thoughts and figure out, does this elicit a response? Does this need to have a response? And I'm thinking like in terms of legal issues now when people will say things. That's where my mindset goes.
For me, it's aside from like, oh crap, it's a chance to reevaluate what I did or what I'm doing, and reevaluate, do I actually believe in this? Do I think that I took the most appropriate course of action? Because the first thing in my head is like, oh my god, you're right, I did it wrong, I screwed up. But after that like half second, I look at my work and I take it as a chance to, I guess, reaffirm my beliefs, or completely say, oh, that was messed up. That was not how that should have run, and I'm going to fix it. So any sort of opposition is a chance for growth on my end. And personally, as a student, it's like, oh my god, is this going to get to my parents? Because they're worried. They're in the field of sex education, which is one that I'm trying to get into, is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for it's not easy, and you will find opposition everywhere you go. So if you can try everywhere, so if you can start dealing with that early, I think that's been how I've approached this situation. I was like, well, might as well start dealing with it now because it's gonna keep happening.
They don't teach you. They don't teach you how to handle controversy when, at least for me, like in terms of education and being a sex educator, there were no classes in terms of like what to do when someone says, you know, you're promoting bestiality. I don't know what to do about that.
we got hate mail from Cuddle Party. It was like, you know, you guys are gross and you should be both. I'm like, really? Hate mail? For cuddling?
That's when you know you've arrived, though.
Well, and that's part of it too, you know. People have strong reactions. It's indicative, and we've all talked about it, it's indicative of how the state of sex and relationships in our culture.
Well, I think also, I mean, that a lot of us are laughing here because, well, it's amusing. It is. But the people who wouldn't be laughing didn't even want to show up, you know? Or maybe some did, and that's actually awesome. So I'll get into that. But what I was getting at was that there is fear about that, but it's not one-sided, is what I was getting. I'm terrified about some of the things that have happened to me recently. They've never happened to me before. I've retained a lawyer because I don't know what to do, because there's blog posts out there that literally accuse me of being a sex trafficker, that literally say that I am a sexual predator and trafficker, is the quote. And this is, a lot of this is from my vocal support. I'm very loud about the things I believe in, and I don't shy away from standing up for what I do. So, and I also do so incredibly publicly, which is another really big obstacle. I'm lucky in the sense that I don't have a lot to lose from a professional perspective, but one reason we don't have a lot of people talking about this stuff really publicly is because people do have stuff to lose. Jobs, kids, parental support, thank you, support, or acceptance. Partners who don't want to, literally, you might lose your boyfriend if you say, I don't want to do anal sex, or I do want to do anal sex, either way. And so you don't know into what situation you're in until you do so, until you talk about the situation with other people, because no one is isolated. We're all have to do these other things. So I look to support from the community, and I look for publicly visible support, because without that, I may be getting a ton of encouragement, but no one else is. But people who would otherwise have been able to do what I do and say, to also stand up, they're not going to see themselves getting any kind of support at all. So they're going to look at the situation and go, oh my God, everyone is talking about how horrible this person is. No one's saying anything to defend them. Even though I get lots of emails from people who are like, I just want to say, your blog, thank you so much. And I go, great, you can have a comment, please. That would be really helpful to me, and in more ways than they can imagine. So that's the public is really, really important.
Right, and I just want to say, when I was given background on this, I saw some horrific things said about you. They were just shocking to me.
They were shocking to me too.
I just even it was things that were so inappropriate to even raise as issues in the field. I mean, it was really a very hateful and horrible kind of attack on me, which really disturbed me tremendously. And I think what you're really pointing to, which is, and our first, I didn't sleep last night, so I didn't tell me your name again? Megan, I think, the silencing that you're speaking about as a professional, trying to, earn a living doing this, get gigs, get, constant work when you're doing something which is not necessarily just reaching out to an edgy community in San Francisco area where there's a lot of consumer interest. I used to live in San Francisco, I know there's a lot of consumer interest there. But in other places that are perhaps more conservative and always having to balance that question with the possibility of losing your work, or losing your employment, losing your job. Academics, I face that in the classroom when I figure out how far I can go in talking about Latin America in my classroom and what's going to get feedback and pushback from the students because I talked maybe too favorably about some political movement in Latin America, thinking that that's inappropriate. So it is something that we can become silenced from. There's another question over here. In the venture. Did you have a question? No?
No, there was someone back there who had a question.
Yes.
Um,
and then next.
So, I don't know the makeup of the audience at all. So I don't know whether you are preaching to a choir, but from where I sit, you guys look kind of like a choir. Because you all, you may not be you may not be exactly the same, but you certainly hold at least similar views. And it's hard. This is a really hard thing to do, but how can you, with the views that you all share, engender conversation with people who are afraid and who write angry and hateful and hurtful things, or who don't, but who still don't agree with you and might not have an easy time talking about it because they don't agree with the type of things that you so often talk about?
I do it whenever I get hate mail. It's always an exciting day because I'm like, oh, like I get to actually email somebody back, and it depends. Like, because I could imagine certain kinds of hate mail where I wouldn't want to email back for legal reasons, like a death threat or something like that for cuddling. Come on. But this idea of I email people back and I'm like, listen, obviously you have some strong opinions. And I'm surrounded by people who are very pro what I do. I'm actually interested in what, could you tell me more about what's going on? And every 90% of those emails that I send out come back and they're like, wow, I never thought I'd get a response. Or I never expected a response. And so I've gotten amazing amounts of information from people who hate some of the things I do, just because I was willing to engage them.
Is there change? Is there dialogue there, or is it just
email
response? That's it.
What
Thank
I'm
you for
doing
responding.
because my career is on track to actually be doing like hosting television talk shows and stuff like that. Like I'm kind of going for the Oprah of sex and relationships for the country in a certain way. So I need to know what people have concerns about, why this is too edgy for them, because I'm trying to speak to everybody. And I'm as a geek, I'm looking for the lowest common denominators. What makes everybody feel safe? What are those things that I can be doing that even though I'm outrageous and a goofball and into things sexually that maybe are not your style, you don't feel judged by me, and you're actually perceiving me as somebody who's giving you permission to figure out what makes you happy and to go for it. That's my secret, formula for trying to engage people. And there are some really scared or angry or passionate people out there who are not really open for the dialogue. They just want to attack. And in those instances, I don't know what to do. I feel a little sad because I would love to get inside their head and learn a little bit more because I do genuinely care. But those people seem to be unreachable, at least right now.
Well, I think it bears emphasis that there's three kinds of audiences, and I think that you can always kind of chop up an audience at least into three different kinds of the people who will always agree with you because you're you, regardless of what you say, who are like yes people. And then there's people who will always disagree with you, regardless of what you say, because they're, we'll leave that at that. And then there's the largest group of people, which is the people who don't know who the hell you are, or what you're talking about, but are willing to listen, or at least are in an environment where one or two touch points is not out of the question. Touch point being a marketing phrase, but you get exposed to an idea, and sadly, the whole first impression being true thing that holds true. And first impressions about sex are often incredibly frightening and negative. So I feel like we're really working up against in the sex positive sphere of work. We kind of, it's a little bit like, what's that Greek god who's pushing a ball up?
Sisyphus.
Thank you. It's a little bit like Sisyphus because you're constantly pushing against this huge thing, and no matter how far you think you've gotten, then something is going to come at you. At least that's how it felt for me a couple months ago. Something's going to come at you and you're like, whoa! Well, I dropped the ball again. Now I have to work on this.
And our culture has been sufficiently devoid of actual dialogue for so long, and the media is role modeling shouting matches over each other, that I think when you do try to engage people, their actual conversation muscles are kind of atrophied.
Well, there's also the opportunity to. But I'm willing and eager to talk to all of those three groups. What I do when I talk to people who already agree with me and who will never agree with me is try to address my points to that third group. And so that's an opportunity. It's subtle and and it's a little sideways, but I feel like that's one of the most effective ways to actually foster conversation, because you can use someone's opposition or support in ways that you want, not necessarily ways that they want. And I want to do so by inspiring conversation with people who are willing to have conversation. So even if that's not the person I'm talking to, maybe it's the person who's listening to us having a conversation.
That's why it's also important, the point that you made about doing things publicly, because then, let's say that this is happening in the blog sphere, because a lot of these attacks sort of started there. If you're being bashed in a post and you leave a very thoughtful reply, someone who reads that, who may have been led to this like very negative thing, will see your point of view as well. And like, if they might be sort of swayed to your cause, or at least swayed to understand. And another thing that I wanted to say was, to address the first point of like, how do you sort of, to a degree, maintain objectivity, because at least for me, I surround myself with people who probably share my own views and I don't get too much opposition. So it's kind of refreshing when it happens, and it makes me reevaluate. To like thinking of what the points of view are at my home, or the points of view that I had when I was younger even. Because if I journaled since I was 7 and I never stopped. If I go back and look at the points of view that I had, they were very different. Like, a lot of things that I like now freaked me out. A lot of things that I like now I thought were probably immoral or scary or dark or whatever. So like, remembering that that was once in my head is very helpful in terms of addressing new audiences and addressing new people. Because I'm like, okay, I was there too. And it's not to say I'm more evolved than you, but I understand where you're coming from. And I understand that that's a fear, and I understand that that might be scary, but maybe let me tell you how I came from that to this and how my journey was. And maybe you'll find some like nugget of information there that can help you not necessarily agree with me, but at least understand where I'm coming from. And another thing, I guess, is, especially when engaging with people, showing them your humanity. Because for a lot of people, if they send hate mail, they assume that you won't reply. They assume that there's this like shadow entity that is just bad and evil, and that there's not a person behind it. And that's what I definitely saw with the attacks after King for All, after Sex Week, after Sex Educator Showdown. There were all these posts and all these emails and like bulletins sent out to the Salvation Army and sent out to like millions of people saying really, really horrible things. And first of all, it's really scary because sometimes people were sort of taking that information, decontextualizing it, or let's say posting it again and saying these people need to get what's coming to them. That's a really scary thing to see on the internet, especially because it can like spread so far so fast. And that's like very personally frightening, like what's coming to me. Like I don't know, I'm very scared right now. But for example, like there were a few people who were sort of on board that train of like, oh, I just got this email from the Salvation Army, this is horrible, I can't believe they're doing this, especially at Brown University. And having found that, engaging with them and being like, hey, I'm a real person, let's talk about it. A few of them actually changed their point of view and apologized. Because they're like, oh, I didn't know, or there was information missing from the information that I got. So trying to talk with everyone, even if they don't want to listen, because maybe you will get the person who wants to listen. Maybe you will accidentally stumble upon a person that is willing to change their mind or at least respect you. So because again, it's not about changing people's minds in terms of what they want to do or what they personally believe is right, but it's about letting them let you live and letting them like see where you're coming from and maybe not want it, but at least respect it. So if you talk to everyone, you'll probably find that some don't care and don't want to listen and don't want to talk back. But if you
find those early and then give up,
yeah.
Because that's not what I mean. We got shit to do, frankly.
Well, I don't want to take time away from people in the audience who want to ask questions, but I think the interesting follow-up to your question is why is the panel constructed the way it is?
the panel's been in terms of who
So
is
you
here to
said,
speak.
For example, that the panel's made up
I'm
of-
very conservative sexually, so that's why they.
No, well, the panel, my idea behind the panel was I wanted to give a voice to the people who were attacked, who were enmeshed, enmeshed in these issues, to talk about like what they thought and how they felt. And we invited, like I personally emailed all the people that were talking shit about us, and I emailed them saying, hey, I know that, you've expressed concern over some of the things that we've done. I'd like to invite you to talk about it, and I'd like to, and it might have been frightening because, well, it's obviously a panel that's biased. It's obviously an audience that's probably biased as well. And it might be scary to go to a place where everyone might not be in favor of your point of view. But we extended the hand, and we've repeatedly reached out to people who've been very negative, and we've said let's talk about it. I'm willing to listen if you're willing to listen. I'm willing to listen even if you're not willing to listen. So the panel is composed the way it is because I wanted to give the voice to the people that were being so represented by others. I wanted to give them a chance to represent themselves, especially in the light of that representation from other people.
And I must say that when I investigated, because I really got this email out of the blue and didn't really know what it was and what was happening, and we talked, it seemed to me that this was really much more of a self-affirmation of what Brown is doing and what you are doing and what the people who are here today are doing. And it's a moment in which you do want to be not necessarily with your opponents, but people who are going to make you feel safe and warm and affirming what you're doing, because it's very hard. And so, I think it would have been a different event if it had been one that there was a raging debate here between different perspectives on ideas. But it seemed to me this was a way of saying, okay, we did something last year, we got real bad pushback. University did come to our support. I did read Lucinda's letter, it was a very good letter. People who work with college life and campus life are here. We are getting that support from the university, but we still kind of need to strengthen ourselves to feel that we can push on. And this is also a message to the next generation of students as people graduate and new students come on, that they too can take this up and don't have to be fearful that what this is going to mean is a consumption of their whole life because people from outside the university are making really vicious attacks against them.
Well,
Before
from
we
my
get to
take,
questions-
what Brown is doing is staying true to our educational mission, which is encouraging dialogue and discussion. So, you can argue, Brown allows the existence of SHEEP, Brown allows the existence of other student organizations, and has a mechanism for students to have this kind of venue, has faculty who can bring issues and engage in dialogue. But it's not, we're not sponsoring or supporting any particular content over another, we're just supporting the educational environment for the purpose of that. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because I think one of the other things that I always look for in a lot of these situations is people do want the Brown name on things. The example I think about is on political activities. Brown is required to stay apolitical, and one of the things, if we have a political person come to campus, you can't have sort of the Brown logo behind it, that sort of Brown is endorsing this person. It's fine that it happened at Brown University, but it's not in fact that Brown is saying, we're not lending our institutional credibility to this speaker necessarily. We're just lending the opportunity for them to have a venue, and others would be welcome to have the same venue. So I think that's just important to keep in mind in terms of the institutional perspective.
Question back here, very patient.
Oh, sorry, you said before I have comments. Sorry. That's good. All right. I'm wondering about this difference between what's offensive and what's harmful. It makes me slightly uncomfortable just because, especially when it comes to the public sphere, so much hate speech inspires harmful actions. So I'm wondering if you all can speak to that a little bit.
You want to take the first go, or?
I keep going first, so I defer.
Can you repeat your question one last time?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you, specifically Maymay,
Yes.
talked about how nobody has the right to be unoffended in their lives, which I'm totally down for. But at the same time, when it comes to hate speech specifically as a category, it makes me extremely uncomfortable when a lot of hateful, violent activity is inspired by people in the public sphere who use hateful rhetoric. So I'm wondering, I'm sure the people on this panel can speak to that out of anyone. I'm wondering if you all can speak to that line and where that line is and what is making you all uncomfortable in your experiences where you feel, shit, I might need to get a lawyer now, or change my address.
For me, if something is going to cause physical harm to someone else, I called Secret Service a couple weeks ago because someone threatened on air, and like that's a line for me. I'm like, we need to keep people safe. So, but in terms of myself, I think that people have the right to state their opinions. But they need to back up those opinions as opinions and not present them as facts. And I think that a lot of the information that has caused this panel to get formed is that opinions were put down as facts.
Also, to speak directly to that, that's a really interesting distinction. One of the groups that sort of didn't super attack us like others did, but they weren't too happy with Sex Week. They weren't too happy with a lot of things on campus of a more progressive or liberal nature. And one of the things that they advocated for was total freedom of speech, and that was sort of on their website as sort of part of their mission statement. And I was like, I don't agree. I don't really agree with that because of hate speech. And I think that there is definitely a line between I'm saying something and you are offended personally, versus like I'm trying to incite action. So with hate speech, Brown has a clause in its policy and in its code and its like student handbook that hate speech is not tolerated. So technically, there is no total free speech at Brown University, but I'm glad for that because I don't really want to hear faggot when I'm like walking down a hallway, and I don't really want to hear hate speech directed at anyone, and I don't want anyone to perpetrate that. So Brown specifically has that in its code. So like I can only speak for Brown University, but that's how it works here, and that's something that I'm glad for, because not every institution would say like, oh, we don't have complete free speech.
One of the founding principles of the law is intent. That's a very tricky thing because it's very hard to figure out what someone else intends to do or intends to say, and maybe said something else. And yet it's a very important concept because it's the distinction between inciting and expressing. And when oh, it's too
Turn off your cell phone, please.
Sorry, it's very but it's a nice tune.
Thank you.
So there's a difference between so the legal intent is a very important concept there, and I feel like I need to get a lawyer when I see the reactions to certain kinds of speech, and when those particular reactions imply action. That's when I go, now I'm really scared. I've been called a lot of mean things, but I've never been afraid that those things would spill over into violence until the things that were said about me were said in a clearly deliberate, by which I mean like used references that actually had misquotes. Like no ... on the, you can do a lot with ... And yet also had, and this is really I think interesting as well, also had links in, well, non-working links, like the links weren't working, but the URL was right, so you could copy and paste it or whatever. The point is, links to the references that were being quoted, and again presented as though it was some kind of academic research, or some kind of academic paper being published, or not even academic, but like organizational paper. And I don't believe that, let me put it this way, there are no truths without full and original context, ever. When you get full and original context, that's the only thing that can give you the opportunity for full justice and for actual justice. And that when we talk about, when do I get a lawyer? When do I have to talk about the legalities here? When the full and original context is not presented or seems to be obstructed. That's the difference I feel between violent speech and non-violent speech. And I don't think that that violent speech is one that is part of the speech that incites violence because of those characteristics, the obstruction of full and original context, or simply the omission of it in a deliberate way, speaks to an intent to harm. And that's kind of where I draw that line. So when it becomes offended, that's fine. Take the quote in context, make the quote actually what it was, and present it as though you were offended, not that I'm dangerous. Because that's another difference. To say that this person is dangerous to the community, or we think this person is dangerous to the community, is a very, very tricky line. Because that's, how many of you know about the Chinese internet mobs, search mobs in China? Yeah, you know that? So that's another great example. Speech hurts, but it doesn't hurt. It's not the thing that kills you. Something else kills you, and that's the violence that kills you. So that's where I would draw the line. Like, violence and nonviolence. I'm actually thinking a lot about that violence and nonviolence thing right now. Hard.
So just so people know, we're going to stop at 8 because I know many of you are going to run back and finish those papers and study for final exam. So if you want to just hang out, and then people have opportunity to formally talk to our panelists and socialize afterward. Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to. I wish that I knew more about, our student code of conduct. I haven't studied it, and I'm not involved in it on a day-to-day basis. I just wanted to clarify though that I think, and there's nobody in this room. Ricky might be the closest person who can even speak to that really well. But I'd like to distinguish between people being able to say what they want to say and things being directed at individuals. And I think that's more of, and even in that situation, you have to look at the individual situation, what was happening, and defining what harassment is complex sometimes. But so I guess universities in general, I've looked at a few different universities in kind of campus-like format, give tremendous leeway as much as possible and freedom to speech. Many universities do, including Brown, and for good reason. But I think the distinction can be when it's directed at individuals versus somebody saying, I think all gay people are going to hell, and and I don't like them. That person has a right to say that. But if individuals are attacked, and I guess there would be a line in terms of inciting violence. I actually don't remember my 20 years ago freedom of speech class that was so interesting about those lines are really, really challenging, and universities struggle with them all the time. And they do the best they can to have as much leeway as they can for, the whole spectrum of ideas. So there's room for this wide spectrum of ideas to be expressed. So
It's how do you create a space where it's safe for you to make yourself feel uncomfortable, or for you to explore that? It's something that I do a lot in my workshops. It's like, what do we need to put in, context-wise, front load in this workshop so that you feel safe feeling awkward or uncomfortable, whether it's with something that you're seeing, an exercise you're participating in, or even just a thought that you go home with. And it's similar.
And sometimes it's not always about safety because, safety in terms of physical sense, yes.
Yeah.
But there are going to be things on campus that I disagree with so much that I just won't go because it's so offensive to me. But we allow those things because somebody else will be offended with what I'm doing. So we have quite a wide leeway. And I think the distinction comes in when people are being individually harassed or groups are being attacked.
Yeah, and I didn't want to. Kind of what you said. I think everybody should individually. It's brown.edu/R&R, rights and responsibilities R&R. You should look at what the policies and stuff say. Hate speech. I don't think it's specifically called out in there, but there are other violations. So you should just become familiar with it. I didn't want to. I couldn't completely validate the way that you worded it or to correct it, but I encourage people to look at it themselves.
I do want to speak to a little bit about individual exclusion. That is a really good point. Really good point. And one of the things that was said early on was that I am an outside collaborator, really more of a supporter. I mean, I did all the organization for Control Providence, and I spoke at the thing. And I set up a live stream, kind of like I did here. Everybody put a laptop on, and I was like, okay, that's done. But I'm an individual, and I purposely avoided doing any kind of trademarks or legal entity kind of work for the King for All unconference model, because it's much more, I believe, much more powerful when a bunch of individuals create a space where other individuals and themselves can feel personally empowered to make the thing that they want to have happen together. Like that, there's a very different approach that people take to, I'm going to go and I'm going to participate because there's this thing that requires participation. Keep from, if you don't know, literally people come in during the day, they sign up on a sticky sticky note on a scheduler, and they make the presentation themselves on the day of. There's no like planning or anything like that. There's no panelists that get approved, and that's a very empowering thing. People often walk in with start of the day going, I don't know about this, and then the rooms get cleaned up at the end of the day, like better than when we found them. Like they're sparkly and quickly, and that's because people have the environment itself engenders that collaboration. And that's a very different thing than doing so behind an organization. And that works both ways, because organizations can often be a person with a name that's not theirs. And then they say, well, we say that this organization stands for X, Y, or Z. And it can be used as a shield, both for individuals, like in the case of corporations. I mean, that's a legal entity that protects the liability of individuals who run that corporation. But it can also be used.
Your attention. We have an event at 8 p.m. and there are people coming. The professors and users.
We should wrap up.
You may wrap up.
Okay, great. So,
but to make that final point, that was exactly the thing. That's exactly why I avoided being a corporation. I avoided doing any kind of thing with entities. But also why I think that full and original context is so important, especially in that case, because that's such an obstruction sometimes too.
So I want to thank the organizers of the event and the participants in the panel and all of you for coming. Let's have a round of applause for all of us. Let's kind of try to move out and have the conversation outside as quick as possible so that
Before you
Yeah?
Can
we help clean up somewhere?
I just want to clarify. So when you were sitting there and had a question, you were getting the chance to ask your question right after you left. I'm so sorry that you left. And I hope that you had a good time.
Bye.